Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 165th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, short one, hopefully, I'll be discussing an article that I've written about the metaverse and what role game engines are going to play in this, and AI, and how this relates to, the whole spiritual 5D kind of narrative. So, these may seem like very technical topics, but don't forget that whatever you say about your outer reality informs you about something that's going on at a deeper level. So there's always this symbolic correspondence between the outside, the inside, even like humanity's own evolution. And this is all taking very symbolic technological forms, but it directly relates to, certain things. Like, for instance, this whole idea of the metaverse and game engines. So some of you may know that like the two biggest game engines that are used for video games are called Unity and Unreal. Those are the two big ones. And what game engines are for is to provide this kind of framework for all the rules that you can have for physics, for lighting, for interaction with objects and collisions and all kinds of that stuff. So they kind of symbolically represent like the rules of physics, like the rules of nature, the natural laws that are translated into code. And then developers then decide to use those laws and create entire games and tweaking things. Like, for instance, gravity is going to be a little less or a little bit like this or that. And you have this amount of acceleration and deceleration and collision and whatever. They can customize it in some regard, but like to bend the rules of physics a little bit. But like the solution itself is you cannot just customize Unity in the sense of modifying the source code. So you can tweak things like customize it really, really profoundly, but there is a limit to the amount of customization that you can get to. There's some like this underlying code that you just cannot modify. And it is believed, I've been reading this book by Matthew Ball called The Metaverse and How It's Going to Change Everything. And he's explaining that, these game engines will be at the core of the metaverse in terms of like the underlying kind of system or baseline for building metaverses on top of them. Now, he does list other sort of metaverse spaces like Minecraft or Roblox, which don't use these game engines, but these are very low poly games or low quality games, so not very fancy graphics and stuff. But then AI appeared, and now it's more and more clear that AI can not only generate images, it can create 3D models, and eventually, and this is only after a year, it can already generate like sophisticated three-dimensional objects. In a matter of years, you could even let AI generate entire worlds for you, virtual worlds. Why not? On the fly. And this changes everything because where these game engines like Unity or Unreal or kind of symbolically represent these unbendable, unbreakable rules of physics and chemistry and biology and things that are like hard-coded, AI represents this very fluid and flexible way of generating a virtual reality, where the rules are whatever you want them to be. And you just need to be able to express them, to say what you want. So it's almost like, almost like we're gods now. Now you ask an AI, say, oh, I want a world where the planets are square and where the gravity doesn't exist and blah, 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 blah. And you just like formulate what you want. In the beginning was the word. And these AI tools would just listen to you, what your laws are, what your requirements are, and that'll generate a three-dimensional environment or any kind of virtual environment where those rules are applied on the fly. So it's almost as if you have to like create the fundamental rules for your reality, and then the AI just generates a world based on those rules that you've just expressed. And that obviously is also this reflection of, in spiritual terms, we're talking about, 3D to 5D, now we can manifest, now we can this and that. That is the symbolic kind of representation there of the shift from something that is unbreakable and that is molded and set in stone, and something that is extremely fluid and just manifests things on the fly for you based on your preferences or your desires. And so you can imagine, this. I've always said that I don't know if I've talked about this in previous videos, but basically the metaverse is the common mind space of humanity. So it's like when you close your eyes, you're in your own personal metaverse, your own fantasy land, right? You can imagine things and whatever. It's like a metaverse for your cells. So you can play out all kinds of virtual scenarios in your head, and then you can use your cells, which are grounded in physical reality, to sort of get an inkling of whether acting on those fantasies would be a good thing. So for instance, you see someone jumping off a cliff and killing themselves, and you're like, ooh, you could try to picture yourself doing it. You're like, that doesn't feel good. And then you see somebody else, I don't know, doing like skateboarding or whatever, and jumping all around with their skateboard and stuff, and you're crap at it. And even though it's going to be painful, you imagine yourself doing it in your mind, and it feels really good and thrilling. And so you act on that thrill, and you do it in physical, like in real reality. You take your cells, your bodily cells, and you actually do it. And so it's kind of like your imagination is the metaverse for your cells, where they can virtually, in a virtual kind of reality, which is your own mind, experience a fantasy and have that kind of inkling of, should we go there or should we not go there? And the metaverse is kind of the same thing, but of course much more sophisticated because it's a fractal above. So it's much more complex, much more, diverse. But in the end, it's almost this experimental space where humanity as a collective gets to interact and experience plenty of virtual things. And then the collective consciousness of humanity, which maybe take the form of AI right now, but it can actually test plenty of different governance, solutions. It can test just about anything. It can test new ways of organizing society, new economic and financial systems, new experiences maybe that humanity wants to have. And then through the feedback of humans as little cells in those virtual spaces and what they feel at that point, then the collective would say, oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, no, let's not go there. That was a failure. And then, that sort of trickles down into physicality as it kind of settles, So you imagine things first and then you do them with your physical body. And in the same way, humanity sort of imagines new virtual spaces for, these decentralized governance and, all these different decentralized metaverses where we can coordinate and synchronize our minds, as humans, and work together towards a collective goal or objective, which can be virtual. It doesn't really matter if it's virtual or physical. But the point being is that now that kind of the underlying framework for doing so will be much more flexible because it won't depend necessarily on these unbreakable rules of, physics and all that stuff. It's almost like you have let's say a community of 1,000 people, and they decide on a constitution, quote unquote, of the rules in their virtual environment, and that is encoded into a blockchain. And there's an AI that looks at those rules and then generates a virtual reality based on those rules on the fly for every single person that goes into that metaverse space. And then, people can iterate. They can change the rules if they want to. I mean, if they don't like the rules, they just vote on new rules. Those rules are again updated into the blockchain based on a certain process. Everybody has to have their keys and all that stuff and be validated as a member to be allowed to vote and change the rules. And then the AI looks at the new rules and just implements them instantly. And this iteration of co-creation, amongst humanity using AI as a kind of a tool for doing that, will just accelerate co-creation tremendously. And it's the same. It's the same as, us here in this space. If you have to bend the rules of physics, it's very lengthy and painstaking and whatever. And it requires a lot of effort, just like programming manually and changing the rules inside Unity and Unreal. It takes a lot of time and effort and whatever. Whereas if you use AI as a sort of a mediator, then the moment you update the rules on the blockchain, the AI just looks at the new updated rules and updates the virtual reality it generates according to those rules instantly. And so it's just that symbolic kind of representation of this increased power that humanity is gaining over reality in general, and this whole manifestation process that is happening quicker and quicker. And I've already talked about that before. If you look at, our reality and you look at the manifestation of physical objects, well, 1,000 years ago, you had to manually carve out the stone, chip things away. You had to manually, melt, rocks to extract the ore, and like all that process took an insane amount of time. You have artisans doing that individually, and it took months and months, And then industrialization came, and then you had these rudimentary machines that could extract more ore, and then you had these huge furnaces and all that stuff. So we sort of scaled that up. But the end effect is, and obviously then you have like robotics now coming in and 3D printing, and it's just like the time lapse between when you have an idea and it actually manifests in physical reality just shortens and shortens and shortens and becomes really, really small. And, the materialist, through the materialist lens, you'd say, well, that's just technological progress, But from a symbolic perspective, if you just imagine humanity as like a collective that is more and more receiving this kind of echo of its own thoughts or what it wants to do, and uses physicalism or physicality and the limitations of physicality to have the opportunity to modify its initial intention before it manifests, then you understand that this is the whole process of ascension and vibrating higher and higher levels of consciousness or whatnot, or ascension. So the image I always give is, imagine that you're in the mountains and you shout with your voice, and then you receive an echo of your shout, right? So imagine if humanity as a collective, when you have an intention, like you want something, you have an idea in your mind and you want to realize it, then putting it into action is the initial, the initial moment where you cry out in the mountains, like your little sound that you emit. And then the continuous action of you actually working on that project, like an artisan, chipping, some stones or whatever, is as if you were carving or modifying or bending that sound as it was going towards the mountains and then as it was coming back towards you. So it's like almost like this physicality is a way to modulate your initial intention before it echoes back and then you hear it. And the moment you hear it is the moment where it actually manifests in your hands and you're like holding the object that you wanted to create. And you probably know that like with your voice, it is at a certain frequency, and the time that it goes to the mountains and comes back to you, it takes a certain amount of time. Now, if you raise the frequency, it travels much faster. So if you have like these, that's why when you call someone with your cell phone, you use gigahertz bandwidths, which travel much faster than your voice. And so that's why, when you call someone, you don't have to wait for the speed of sound of your voice to actually go to the relay tower and coming back and whatever. And so the same kind of process is happening. But obviously we just have this lens of physicality, of experiencing it with physicality. And so we explain it with physicality, but that's not the underlying reality. Is we're manifesting quicker and quicker. And this is just the effect of raising the vibration. And we're using technology and materialism as an interface for seeing that and understanding that and modulating that, because it is the most practical interface. It's like, why would you choose Windows over Linux over Mac OS? Doesn't matter. I mean, we could have created any kind of interface to experience this, quickening of manifestation. It didn't have to be physical or technological. It's just that it is probably still the best interface for the maturing of our consciousness in mastering that kind of, manifestation process. Using it responsibly. And again, coming back to the initial topic of these game engines, which represent like the strict laws of physics and whatever, and AI, it is this moment where humanity sort of realizes that physicality is limited, just like these game engines are limited, and that if you want to manifest something from the unlimited into the limited, which is the moment where basically AI, which is infinite, represents infinite potential, looks at what your rules are and then manifests something out of nothing that corresponds to your rules, which is real creation now. It's like creating, new matter out of the void. That is, the symbolics between what we're experiencing now and what is happening at the virtual level. And it happens in the virtual first because obviously it's good that we that we master collective co-creation in a respectful and whatever manner in the virtual before we actually gain that sort of power in the material. And if you look at all of the different theories now, for instance, now you have the physicalists are losing this battle. And you have more and more, researchers and thinkers and philosophers that are saying that consciousness is primordial. Mind is, mind is at the heart of everything. But then why would mind be limited by strictly physicality and this all of these laws and entropy and the equivalence, the fact that anything that you cannot create or destroy anything, that it's all just transformation of existing energy, all of those rules that are really, really, really limiting, just like those game engines are. Why if everything is consciousness, why if everything is mind, everything is just holographic, everything is just virtual, why are those limitations there? It just doesn't make sense, right? And if you take now like science to the extreme of like the quantum quirks and stuff, then you understand that even in a tiny centimeter cube of matter, there's 99.999% void, which has an infinite amount of energy in it. It's just that you can't tap into it as humans. We don't have like the technology or whatever. And eventually we will. Eventually we will be able to just manifest anything without having to consider this equivalent, like really adding something new into reality. But when you do that, you better be a quote unquote master because you can really screw things up like really, really badly. And so that is why we're in this process of learning to do it first in the virtual. At least that's how I see it, before we sort of do it in the material, in the physical. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, whatever, and talk to you